Today we'll be looking at a case from the first part of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to France. Léon-Philippe Poe, better known by his stage name, Harry Fragson, was born on the 2nd of July 1869 at 4 Old Crompton Streets in the heart of Soho in London. His parents, Victor and Leontine Poe, were French expatriates, part of a small but vibrant community who had made their home among the crowded cafes and multilingual theatres of late Victorian London. Victor Poe ran a hotel, and the family's early domestic life was rooted firmly in the cultural heart of the capital, amid the music halls, foreign newspapers, and the bustling daily routines of Londoners. In 1871, the family moved a short distance to 42 Greek Street, still within Soho, a neighbourhood known for its noise and commerce. Leon grew up amid this cosmopolitan scene, and though he spent part of his schooling in Antwerp, his early years were thoroughly steeped in a diverse urban culture that would shape his later career. From an early age, music and performance were central to his interests. He began singing in public in the mid-1880s, often in concerts in towns beyond London, where he quickly attracted attention. But he did not want to be known as Léon-Philippe Poe, so he adopted the name Fragson, a playful and defiant twist on the name the English often used to describe people from France. However, he soon modified this to Fragson, a more elegant stage name, which suited his growing fame and cosmopolitan appeal. By 1890, he had relocated to Paris, settling in the Montmartre district. There, in cafes and cabarets, he began to make a name for himself with his sharp impersonations of a famous French singer named Poulos. What began as mimicry soon developed into a sophisticated act in its own right, and as Harry developed a charming stage persona, he began performing his own songs, accompanying himself at the piano. Audience responded warmly to his light humour, musical agility, and engaging presence. He was described by music hall historian Richard Anthony Baker as tall, with large expressive eyes, a drooping lower lip, and long strands of hair that were plastered over his otherwise bald head. This distinctive appearance, along with his bilingual fluency, made Harry a popular figure on both sides of the channel. He could play the Englishman in Paris or the Parisian in London, switching cultural identities with ease. In 1905, his growing reputation caught the eye of Arthur Collins, the manager of the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane. Mr. Collins had seen Harry performing in Paris, and he was so taken by his stage presence and comic timing that he offered him a part in the pantomime Cinderella. Harry was cast as Dan Digney, a light-hearted and witty courier who provided much of the show's comic relief. And as Mr. Collins had seen Harry's musical ability, he even asked him to write a song for the production. Harry responded by writing Whispers of Love, that was sang by the lead performer, an actress named May de Sousa. The pantomime was a triumph, and after it finished, Harry Fragson was firmly established as a star both in England and France. Over the following years, he continued a demanding schedule, performing at leading theatres and music halls across Europe. He recorded prolifically, his voice recognisable for its blend of French intonation and English phrasing. He was equally at home in either language, singing in French with a trace of English in Paris, and English with a trace of French in London. In early 1912, he toured Scotland, appearing at the King's Theatre, and returned to the same venue in October 1913. By now, his success as both a songwriter and a composer was well known. He had frequently collaborated with the lyricists Wharton David and Bert Lee. Among their popular creations were the songs Other Department Please, written in 1910, and All the Girls Are Lovely by the Seaside, and Hello, Hello, Who's Your Lady Friend, both written in 1913, and the latter becoming one of his most enduring hits. That same year, he appeared in a short French film named L'Entente Cordiale, alongside the legendary comedian Max Linder. It was safe to say that Harry Fragson was famous. His personal life was intertwined with the theatrical world. He was at one point married to Alice Delicia, a celebrated star of the French stage, but the marriage ended, and in 1913 he was once again living in Paris at 56 Rue Lafayette. He shared his home with his aging father Victor, who had by now become increasingly unstable. Harry's mother had died 10 years earlier. However, his father, who had previously been a successful hotelier, was now in his 80s and was suffering what appeared to be paranoid delusions and mental decline. Harry did his best to care for him, but the atmosphere in their shared Paris apartment had grown increasingly strained. For some time, tensions had been quietly building between the two men. Monsieur Paul had become mentally fragile and suspicious, fixating on an idea that seemed to have no foundation in reality, that his son was having an affair with a much younger woman who sometimes helped out in the apartment, named Paulette Frank. Though there was no evidence to support this claim, indeed, most who knew the family dismissed it as a delusion. Victor had become consumed by the belief. What began as vague jealousy soon hardened into a conviction of betrayal. His behaviour grew erratic and increasingly difficult to manage. He would alternate between being very quiet and not talking to anyone, to outbursts of anger, accusing Harry of disloyalty and Paulette of manipulation. Friends of the family began to take notice, with some confiding privately that they feared Victor's mind was deteriorating. Even Paulette's stepmother voiced her alarm, warning others that the old man's moods were becoming dangerously unstable. She reported that Paulette had admitted to becoming frightened by Victor's strange and unpredictable behaviour, and there was a shared sense among those closest to the household that the situation was rapidly worsening. What made matters even more difficult was that Harry had only recently finished a successful run at the Paris Alhambra and was now preparing to travel once again to England, where he would be performing for several weeks. As he planned to be away for an extended period, Paulette had agreed to accompany him, and this, of course, meant that his father would be left alone in Paris. Concerned about leaving him unattended, Harry made arrangements for Monsieur Poe to be placed in a nursing home during his absence. However, when Harry informed his father of the plan, the elderly man apparently pleaded to remain in the apartment. Despite his father's protests, Harry was deeply worried about his declining health and insisted that it would not be possible. On the evening of December 30th, 1913, Harry gave tickets to both his concierge and his maid so they could attend his last performance at the Alhambra and hear him sing. It was a kind gesture, but it meant that his father would have to stay at home that evening. Following his performance, Harry made his way back to 56 Rue Lafayette. As he reached the building, he climbed the steps to the door. He found it locked. This was odd, as his father usually kept it open when he was out. He pressed the bell once again, but still there was no answer. Inside, Harry's father was seated at the table, but slowly he got up. Whether he had been lost in thought or had just chosen not to answer right away is unclear, but after a pause, he made his way to the door and unlocked it. Harry stepped in, visibly annoyed. He was tired from the performance, and perhaps a little short-tempered. He made a comment, sharp, perhaps sarcastic, about having to wait, and his father responded in kind. The irritation flared quickly. A few bitter words led to more. It was just another argument, and it bore the weary marks of many before it. The same grievances, the same wounded pride. Then suddenly, those in the building heard what they thought was the sound of a gunshot. The first person to discover what had happened was a young girl who had been asked to temporarily take over the duties of the concierge that evening. She was unaware of what had happened inside the apartment, but just moments after the shot was fired, she went upstairs, as Monsieur Poe had received a telegram. However, she was shocked when the old man answered the door and pointed to Harry lying on the rug. He then said that he had shot his son. The girl looked down. She saw Harry and thought that his face looked like wax. There was no blood on it, but it seemed very distant, as if all expression had been drained from it. Monsieur Poe then turned to her and said that she'd better fetch the police. Without a word, she ran into the streets and searched frantically for help. Not far away, she spotted a uniformed officer and in a very distressed manner tried to explain what had happened. The officer acted at once, sending word to the Commissioner of Police for the district. Within minutes, 56 Rue Lafayette was no longer just a quiet apartment building. It had become the centre of a serious investigation. Officers moved quickly through the area, looking for anything that may aid their investigation. When the commissioner arrived, the scene inside was still grim. He arranged for the body to be transported to the mortuary, where doctors examined the injuries and found that Harry had died from a single shot that had entered his head just behind his right ear. During this time, Victor Poe remained in the apartment, composed but subdued. Eventually, he was asked to accompany the commissionaire to the police station. He nodded and then followed, leaving the apartment behind without resistance. When he was interviewed, there was no confusion in the old man's voice, just quiet resignation. He told investigators that he had just finished his dinner when his son rang the doorbell. Because of his fear of burglars, the door had been bolted, and it took him a while to get up, walk through the corridor, and unlock it. According to Monsieur Poe's accounts, Harry then entered the apartment in anger and started to accuse him of being a delusional old man who interfered with his life. Looking straight at the commissioner, Monsieur Poe said, "I tried to explain, but my son became more aggressive. He even called me an old drunk. Finally, driven beyond endurance, I took the revolver, not to shoot him, but to shoot myself. Just as I raised the weapon, he passed beside me and jostled me. Then the gun went off." The commissioner was silent for a moment, before confirming what he had just heard, and said, "So you are saying this was an accident?" Monsieur Poe nodded, and in a quiet voice, said that it was. The police, however, were not entirely convinced by this version of events. While the murder deeply shocked the public, many who knew the family were not entirely surprised. Victor Poe had long been regarded as mentally unwell, a man consumed by strange ideas and convinced that others were against him. His moods were unpredictable, and over time, his behavior had grown increasingly unstable. He had threatened his son on more than one occasion, and often spoke of no longer wishing to live. Harry, for his part, had confided in friends that he feared that his father was losing touch with reality. Though he kept such concerns private, those close to him knew that he felt increasingly uneasy at home, troubled by what he saw as his father's slow but steady decline. When Monsieur Poe's version of events appeared in the press, few believed them. The concierge of the building described Mr. Harry Fragson as a kind, even-tempered man, and insisted that in his opinion, the shooting was no accident. The French newspapers echoed this view. Le Journal dismissed Monsieur Poe's accounts as cold and calculated, while Le Figaro suggested that the act had been deliberate, fueled by years of buried resentment. Some pointed to Victor's disapproval of his son's theatrical career, a profession that he had never accepted and had once tried to prevent him from entering. Though the two had later reconciled, many believed that the strain had never fully disappeared. The bitterness may have faded from view, but it had not vanished, and in the end it may have surfaced in the most violent and tragic way. Monsieur Poe was arrested, and it was decided to take him to a psychiatric hospital, where he could be assessed by medical professionals. The death of Harry Fragson sent shockwaves through France and England. More than 50,000 mourners joined the funeral procession in Paris, which passed through the streets to the church of Saint Augustin. He was laid to rest in the Père Lachaise cemetery, among other great figures in French culture. Just 6 weeks after Harry's death, his father, Monsieur Victor Poe, died while under psychiatric care. He had not been tried for the murder of his son, having been declared unfit to stand trial due to his mental condition. Confined to an asylum following the shooting, he had remained there under constant observation. His health, which was already fragile, had declined rapidly, and he died without ever facing a court of law. Thus the case came to a quiet and unresolved end, one marked not by justice, but by sorrow, silence, and the shadow of a fractured mind. In the months that followed, legal matters surrounding Harry quietly unfolded in London. He had left most of his assets in England and had died unmarried and without a will. Under normal circumstances, his estate would have passed to his next of kin, so in this case, his father, Monsieur Victor Poe. But he too had died, never claiming his legal rights to his son's estate. With no will and no immediate relatives to inherit, Harry's assets that he had in England were formally handed over to the Crown. Letters of administration were granted to the solicitor for the affairs of His Majesty's Treasury, a government official responsible for managing such matters. In the aftermath, a handful of individuals came forward, claiming to be distant relatives, hoping to be able to get the money that Harry had left behind. But after investigation, it was found that none of these were actually genuine relations, and their claims were dismissed. Monsieur Victor Poe's own affairs were just as grimly unresolved. He too had died without a will, a widower with no surviving family. The small property he left behind in England, like his son's estate, also reverted to the Crown. Though his life was cut short in such a sudden and sorrowful way, Harry Fragson left behind a lasting legacy. He was a unique figure who connected two cultures, performing successfully both in Paris and London. His voice and songs entertained thousands, becoming a familiar and cherished part of the music hall tradition. His career captured the spirit of the time, bringing joy and laughter to audiences during the vibrant golden era of the music hall. His tragic death added a note of sadness to his story, and is a reminder that behind success, there is often personal struggles that sometimes remain hidden. Even now, Harry Fragson is remembered, not only for his talents, but for the brief bright mark he made on early 20th century entertainment. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching. If any of you are interested in listening to the music of Harry Fragson, you will be able to find it on YouTube. Please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case